Hey friends, we have some news from our sponsor Text Control. They just released version 32 of their document processing library, which includes new core functionality such as document footnotes, SVG export, and more. You can integrate document editing, signing, collaboration, and PDF processing into your ASP.NET Core and Angular applications with Text Control. These powerful libraries will let your developer teams focus on their core competencies, while Text Control handles your digital document processing. Check out all the new features and see the technologies live in action by visiting the demo at demos.textcontrol.com. That's demos.textcontrol.com. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today, I'm chatting with Ash Coleman. She's the Chief Executive Officer of CountrPT, longtime technologist working in such places as Credit Karma and speaking all over the world at conferences. And we actually were hanging out. Where were we?
We're in Berlin.
Berlin last time I saw you. So good to see you in the new year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
So you're working on a product called CountrPT, and I love the way that it's phrased on your LinkedIn, relieving the tension between manager perceived value and employee contribution. I literally just filled out my annual review. And then, I don't know why they put it right at Thanksgiving. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to fill it out and then be thankful to have a job or what that's about. But I filled it out and it's just I hope it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's called a Connect at Microsoft. It's basically a quarterly review. And they always try to downplay it, but there's tension. You know what I mean? There's tension there. And my boss rejected it. So he rejected it, and my boss is cool. So I'm talking crap about my boss in a podcast, but he rejected it, and he's like, I don't even know what you're saying here. Talk to me. And then and it was very crisp. And I got a little upset, and I went for a walk, and I was like, he's actually right. And then I went back in and I fixed it, and I was much more quantitative, much more clear about what I was doing. And then I realized that was kind of a tough love, lowercase t, but he was right. And then I was mad at him because he was right. But all of that is based on a decade of actually having a boss that cares. So long monologue there, and I didn't mean to not let you talk, but I feel like everyone should have that experience with their boss, and virtually no one has those.
No one has it. No one has it. The dynamics of managers and independent contributors has changed so much over the years. And for those folks who are managers like myself and have been for many years, I look at the industry and it makes me incredibly sad to see how people perceive their managers. But also, it's in conjunction with what managers have become within the organization. We're seeing these trends these days of a thinning manager layer and even the promotion of managers going back to individual contributor roles because there is so much oversight or so much need for managers to actually produce. And I can see the dissonance. Do I spend my time managing individuals and growing them, or do I spend my time working on the things that I actually enjoy? And this is something that has grown to such a huge issue these days. And that's one of the motivations behind CountrPT.
So what has changed? Because you're right, it does feel different. I also feel like, and I'm not speaking about Microsoft specifically, but that's where I'm at right now. People wake up one day and become a manager. While in the past, when I started,
career path.
It was a career path. It was a very formal thing, and there was very formal training, in-person training. And now I feel like people just get assigned here's 4 people. You're a manager now. Watch this video in double speed.
Yep. And so one of my last gigs, we were responsible for creating a program, the Do I Want to Be a Manager program. And this was because so often engineers were so efficient at their jobs that they just grew to the point where folks allocated being a manager to them instead of them taking that career path into the field. And then what you get are a number of resentful engineers who are spending their time growing people who in some ways they're in competition with, some ways they could do the work and they feel they can do it better. There's this mind shift that happens when you become a manager. And I remember my first couple of years where I had to turn off well, I can just do it myself and learn how to delegate. And I think for those folks who are really great at their job in engineering who don't want to be managers, who are allocated to the job, letting that go is one of the hardest things. And they find themselves in competition with it for many years after.
Hmm. Yeah. I have a team now, and I'm what we call an M2, a manager of managers.
Yeah.
M2 is what we call it at Microsoft. And I've always felt like, am I supposed to just do one-on-ones all day long?
Uh
Like,
huh.
because I also like my individual contributor job.
Yeah.
So then what's the correct amount of being me? And then my directs who have a team of their own, how much individual contribution should they do? And what feeds their spirit? What feeds their, because otherwise it's just management by walking around and no one likes
Exactly.
that.
No. And everyone likes to be a contributor. And the M1 to M2 shift is another as well, right? You're now leading leaders versus leading
Hmm.
individual contributors. And so it's a different type of management technique altogether. But I always almost jokingly say in the beginning, it should be 50-50. You should be able to say 50% of my time is allocated to doing my work and to working on what I would consider direct impact to the business from coding or whatever my skill set is. And then the other 50% is growing individuals, monitoring, documenting, reporting, etc. There is nowhere near that margin or that metric that is happening with managers these days. And you can see it just by the way work is allocated and what the responsibilities look like to the organization.
Mm. Okay. So since we're doing real talk here, why is it feels like there's an erosion of respect for the manager job
Hmm.
by the line engineers, by the rank and file. They're like, I don't even know what my manager does
Yep.
anymore. Right? They just call me and they want status updates.
Uh
And then
huh.
we get into and then you add in remote work. You get into this sense of there's a lot of busy work. There's a lot of reporting up the chain and informing people that stuff is happening. But I'm like, for what purpose?
Right.
We do these pillar documents where everyone gets in a Word document and writes a 40 freaking page document.
Uh huh.
And then we get on a call and we sit there for an hour and we all read it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really feel productive, but I don't remember doing that 15, 20 years ago. And it feels like the whole role has changed.
And I think that it, not necessarily that happened on purpose, but it is in some ways filling the job of a manager to what would be idealistic for a manager these days is how do we account for the type of numbers that we're pushing through our quarterly goals? Or how do we account for the bottom line and how we're making impact on that? And you need numbers to be able to say that. And I learned this initially when I was in quality engineering, and we would talk about how many bugs we would find, and we would use that as the metric to understand how well our quality engineering team was doing.
Yeah.
And anyone who understands uh, finding, fixing, and building code, you know that the number of bugs isn't indicative on how quality the product is itself. But
Mm.
people will use a superficial number or this reporting to be able to create the story that they want to tell. The story is more important than the numbers, but people will find anything to justify the numbers to be able to tell the story the organization wants to hear.
Yeah, that is interesting. And then we also are this erosion of trust and the story that they want the organization to hear starts getting people thinking that their bosses are looking at whether their mouse is moving or not.
Uh-huh.
And like you get these myths about like Teams, Microsoft Teams is looking at my mouse. And it's like, no, it's not looking at your mouse. Somebody saw a robot on Instagram that someone had that like they could go to lunch and it would just move their mouse back and forth to
Yeah.
convince their boss that they were working. Like, when did we start infantilizing like grown ass adults?
Oh heavens. This is a whole other this is a whole other conversation of it's the treating adults like children. It's the I want to see the work, I want to see the numbers, show me what you're doing, let me know that you're productive. When in reality, this, like you said, this wasn't an issue years ago. We were showing our work by completing the tasks and getting the work done. We were making quality products. We were having conversations about them. We were
Mm.
building dope stuff and people were excited about it. And now we're so super saturated with reporting And managers spend most of their time doing that. And so for me is how do you streamline the process which relieves that tension from your manager having to calibrate you based off of these numbers and figures that are kind of ambiguous at the end of the day.
Mm.
And then also help individual contributors really feel like they can have that conversation with their manager. And I think that your manager is amazing after, like you said, a decade of working with him in being able to say, I want the real conversation, Scott. I don't want the what you think I want to hear. I want the how are you feeling? What are you doing? And
Yeah.
that's real management. But again, we've grown out of that because again, it comes down to how am I best able to account for the numbers that coincide with the impact, that coincide with the goals, that coincide with the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah. There is always that manager perception, like, and but also here's a way to phrase it. And I'm curious what you think about this. I have talked to people on my team that are more earlier in their career. We
Mm-hmm.
used to say junior, but they're maybe earlier in their career. And I would say I have had conversations where I've said, it's not on you to have empathy for your VP or whoever
Yeah,
runs the division. But in this moment, I'm asking you to have empathy for this person because
sure.
they're not. It's not on them to do that. But I
Mm-hmm.
say, put yourself in the mind of vice president of developer division, whatever. What's her uh, what's her pressures? Who's calling her? Like, what keeps her up at night? And I said, if
Mm-hmm.
you can help your like your VP for your division be successful, then you'll be successful.
Absolutely.
And I feel like we stopped thinking about that stuff. Like when I started 15, 20 years ago in management space, I would think about like, what, is Satya calling so and so and yelling at them? And is that why I currently am having stuff rolling downhill?
Uh-huh.
But right now there's such a tired, like everyone's tired of capitalism. Everyone's tired.
Uh-huh.
That empathy going back the other direction is increasing that gap. And now you feel like it's a nanny state.
Yeah, I mean, this is what has happened, or at least what I've observed, is communication from the top down has gotten so loose and
Mm-hmm.
so just void of actual context. And I think this is a part of that nannying issue, which is if we treat these folks like they're not adults and they can't handle this information in a gingerly way, we're not going to talk to them about it. However, communication is one of the biggest forms of bringing empathy to the table. So if you're not communicating what the business needs are, by talking about these individual at the executive layer. So these VPs who have needs and need the empathy. If we're not actually talking about the problems that they're faced with, and there's no ownership from the individual contributor or more early stage career individuals where they don't feel like they're attached to solutioning these problems, that's where you're getting the dissonance. Nobody owns anything anymore, and therefore they don't care for it as if they own it. If you're not bringing people into the org as owners of the actual output or the impact or the product, then you're not going to get people acting accordingly. So it's almost chicken and the egg where it's do you loosen the strings a little bit and say, hey, we're going to let you know what's going on really with the business. It's not just about the numbers. It's about how are we building something where we're showing care to the product. And then folks saying, yeah, I can get behind that. We've lost a lot of morals in people joining companies because they care about a product. We've lost a lot of the connection on how they own that particular area of the curation of that product. And that's why I think so many people don't care.
Yeah, there's a lot. You just said a lot. That was a
Mm-hmm.
word because there's the people are bouncing from job to job,
Uh-huh.
and I have a bias as a person of a certain generation. I don't know if we are contemporaries. You look quite youthful, but let's assume that we
Don't be
are with.
fooled by this baby face.
Let's assume that we are within a few years of each other, where I'm from a generation where you would not think about leaving a company earlier than 3 to 5 years because
Mm-hmm.
organizational change takes time.
Yep.
So when I look at someone's resume, this is a bias that I have, a negative bias, and I see 18 months at Zoom, 18 months at Google, 18 months at Amazon, 18 months at Netflix. That's impressive on its
Mm-hmm.
face because I recognize all those names. But what can you really do in 18 months other than ship a
Exactly.
feature? But when I tell that bias on a podcast or to a young person, they're like, well, you boomer. No, this is how it works now. Look at my salary and how it increased over time.
Mm-hmm.
I needed that because I wanted to get a house because the rent is too damn high.
Yep.
And then we get into a whole longer conversation. But they've lost all empathy for capitalism, all empathy for their bosses, all empathy for the process, and now it's a game.
Hmm.
And I feel like the gamification of my career is not something I'm used to in my generation.
Yeah, and I think there has been a huge shift in that, and I'm old enough to have seen that shift as well, to play both sides of it, where when they create a game by the growing economy and making rent, places to live, etc., so expensive, but then also just feeding into that by showing how job hopping creates higher salaries, people are
Hmm.
going to do that. They're going to do what they need to do to get their life taken care of.
And you can't fault
And
them for that
you can't fault
either.
them for that.
Yeah.
But so many people do because they come from this older generation in leadership and they're saying, 18 months is not enough to do it. No, it's not. But 18 months is enough time to get really great at some of these skills that will get you hired
Mm,
to the next level at the next company. However,
right.
what we've lost a lot of in that game is people who are empathetic leaders. This is where we go back into that management of now who are your managers? They're the people who have executed 18 months at a company and have gotten really great at their skill set but have not gotten great with people management or communication. And therefore, you have people who don't like the role of management and people who also are being managed by these folks who don't like their managers because of it.
Yeah. And that also points out that, like, if I didn't expect to be a manager, I was suddenly thrust into the job of being a manager. I tolerate it and don't like it. I also might look at the people on my team as my competition. Then you have a problem where a manager literally thinks their directs are their
Are their
competition.
competition, and that happens so often.
It's so
And
unhealthy.
it is unhealthy. But here's another thing is because of this climb, management is the crown. For a lot of folks in this
Mm.
competition to get to the top of their career, management carries a badge of honor. And this is both culturally as well as communally. And so when you have cultures and communities who are saying, yes, I get to go back to my parents and my family and say that I'm prestigious enough in Silicon Valley to say that I'm a manager at Google, that is admirable.
A friend of mine, I won't say her name, but she's from overseas,
Hmm.
and she's very successful, and her whole family's successful. They all are, like Rhodes scholars, and they all have fancy titles. She has worked for Microsoft for many years and is very well thought of. But when she got the title program manager, her mom was like, "Now you're a manager," and like she's a
Hmm.
manager, and it's like that held so much weight. And she's like, "I've been killing it for years, and now because of this title change, you're super jazzed about that."
My mother did not know what I did at work
Yeah.
until I became a manager. And then all of a sudden it was like, "Oh my gosh, my daughter," she actually would lie to her friends and say, "My daughter is a doctor," because I studied in pre-med in college, and she really wanted me to become a doctor because it's a quick title to be able to say, "My kid has made it." And coming from the background that I came from, that is a big deal to my mom. However, she would lie to her friends and say, "Yeah, my daughter's a doctor," until she realized, "Oh, she actually is doing really well
Yeah.
in her role, even though she just got the title of manager."
Okay, so let's pop off the stack to the beginning here, because if your mom doesn't know what you do, but then the
Mhm.
name manager means something,
Yeah.
but then your directs don't even know what you do.
Okay.
Like, you're a manager, like, I don't know what my manager does. He just calls me and gives me a hassle twice a week. Then you start hearing about people managing up,
Uh-huh.
where they're managing the perception of their manager. That gets back to that gap. There is a
Yep.
gap between manager perception and employees doing their jobs. Did you see the Spotify ad? I don't know if it was real or not. It went viral a couple of days ago. It was an ad like it's about the Amazon return to office thing. And it
Mhm.
said, "We hire adults.
Yep.
We're not going back to the office." And I thought that was a really cool perspective.
I did a whole TikTok video on that. So the CHRO, phenomenal woman, came full force with the statement, "I'm hiring adults because they're adults, right? We're not hiring children here, and we're going to treat them like adults." And I stand 10 toes down on that, where you really have to realize the folks in the room have the capacity to hold information that is worthy of critique and that is worthy of conversation and pushback. But you also have to build an organization that is strong enough to have that level of contention within the conversation as well. And if you're not doing that, then that's where you get a bunch of this nannying issue and hiring adults, but treating them like children. And yeah, there's going to be a few people who never quite make it up to the line of an adult that you
Yeah.
work with. But for the most part, if we are treating people like, hey, listen, you didn't, appropriately fill out your PTO work or whatever it is, and holding them accountable for stuff, I think accountability is largely lost in corporate, especially within tech. And
Yeah.
that's a part of this story about, are we hiring adults?
I struggle with that because I know it's as you become a manager, if you are a good manager, you learn a lot about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So like before when I called out like this is a bias that I carry, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm literally looking at myself in the mirror and going, that's a problem, Hanselman. You need to work on that. I don't like conflict. So I'm like this classic Gen X manager where it's like, hey buddy, you haven't done your expense report, so I kind of need you to do that. And it's like filling out your expense report on time and not having your corporate credit card taken away from you or showing up to a meeting on time is a minimum bar.
Right.
I saw someone at work who had a auto reply or something where, when you chat someone on Teams and they have a little status and it said, I regularly show up late for meetings. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
don't tell
No.
people that. Just show up on time for meetings.
Right. And also just don't do that, right? And that's the thing is, I mean, I'm a Black woman, so when I get in the when I get in this space, you could ask my husband. My husband's a white man, but when he was dating and married me, there were many conversations that we had where he's like, I'm just not used to this level of directness. And I am so sorry, but in my household growing up, we did not get the, dishes are in the sink. It's okay. We'll take care of them tomorrow. No, my mom was like, I've worked 3 jobs all week and there are dishes in the sink that y'all put in there. You need to clean them. And I just think that that's just a part of running a harmonious household is
Yeah.
nobody wants to show up to the sink with dirty dishes in it. Nobody can do the work. And it's the same thing in the office, which is, hey, listen, you want to get paid on time and I want you to get paid on time. And therefore we both have a commitment and an obligation to do the things necessary for that to happen. So
That is
maybe
that
that's
is
just,
a very funny but also very true kind of cultural difference.
Mhm.
Like my dad and I mean I'm a very West Coast Portland kind of like plaid shirt lumberjack type, and hey, we'll do it tomorrow, man. It's cool. I'm kind of like a Northwest Matthew McConaughey. So, but when my wife sees like 2 Amazon boxes, that's too
Too
many. We're
many.
going
Too many.
we're going to recycling, and like so she'll. But the problem is she'll do it when we're doing something else. Like we're going to dinner,
Uh-huh.
we're stopping by recycling first, and it's like, no, I want to go to dinner. No, this needs to be done.
It needs to be
There,
done.
there are dishes in the sink,
Hmm.
and that I think goes into my management style, where I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I just need to start telling people my expectations,
Absolutely.
and I just worry that they're going to be sad, and I'm like,
There's
I don't
nothing
want you to
matter
be
with
sad.
sadness. So me becoming a parent, I used to babysit when I was a kid for extra money, but me becoming a parent really put all of this in perspective where especially in the workplace, people talk about feelings not being allowed in the workplace. And I largely disagree. I think that again, with this adult conversation is about the maturity of being able to handle adult feelings, which is if
That,
you're sad,
yeah,
listen, I hear you. I'm a huge mirror when it comes to management. I hear you, Scott. I know you're sad and that really sucks. And I need you to be responsible for these things. You have plenty of space in this conversation to be sad and you're also committed to being accountable to your actions. It's not either or. This isn't a zero sum game. This is you can hold big feelings and you can be responsible.
yeah. The what the role is of feelings at work has been
Mhm.
interesting as we watch. We're starting to have a conversation at work about generational leadership,
Uh-huh.
where I've got maybe 5 years left, and the 25-year-old that I'm working with today,
Mhm.
they're going to be me. Like they
Oh
don't
yeah.
get that. All they have to do is stay here for 10 years,
Mhm.
and they'll be the boss, and I will be in the ground. And they're going to need to well, maybe not the ground, but like I'll be like lying on a meadow on the ground. But you know what I mean? Like I'll be gone and they'll be in charge. So like you have to look at the 25-year-old who works for you as
Uh-huh.
your future boss or as the future leader of the entire company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's the next Satya? And if we can't have conversations where we say, "Hey, that report you did kind of sucked," like
Yeah.
like if I tell you a story. So sometimes when you're sad at work, you kind of like act out. And my way of acting out is animated GIFs in Teams
Mhm.
meetings. And sometimes you just drop an absolute banger.
Uh-huh.
And like I'm trying to focus on some important quarterly thing, but like I put in an animated GIF that I think was Michael Jackson eating popcorn or whatever, because
Mhm.
these two managers were fighting. And my VP chats me and she just goes, "Not helpful."
Yep.
And I was like, ooh, like, was the 12 likes that I got on that animated GIF worth the slap that I just got from my VP? And I don't like feel bad in the sense of like, she was right. It was
Yep.
not helpful. It did not move things forward. But is it going to, am I going to write a Medium post about my feelings about how I can't bring my full self to work? No, I put an inappropriate animated GIF into a Teams meeting at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And I took that as a moment to learn, maybe
I
tone the GIFs down.
First off, you and my husband are the same because I love how the likes on the GIF always become the argument. Well, 17 people liked it, so I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
think I was too far off. And I think there's room for both too, though. I don't know. For me, it's never been about keeping professionalism at high scale. Again, this comes back to a cultural thing for me where professionalism has been used as such a weapon in the context of career and corporate for such a long time. We're all just, again, we're people and we have feelings and we're
Oh,
petty sometimes. I'm one of the pettiest MFers you're going to meet, right? I love being petty. And I also love showing up and getting my job done. And if there's a way for me to mix those two things, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to make it fun. And sometimes I'll make it sharp for the people who deserve it.
yeah, someone said that it's level privilege. I've talked about level privilege, like when you
Mhm.
unpack all the different privileges, but having a certain level, like having senior in your name,
Oh, yeah.
means your emails get like done faster. Arguably, people like people spell check. When you get like the title VP, I get very few emails with spelling errors
Oh, yeah.
because people are like thinking about that. But I try to like remind them that I'm a human with a little animated GIF or an emoji or just like a little moment where it's like, hey, actual human here. It's
Uh-huh.
okay. Someone invited me to give a speech somewhere, and I could have like replied with a very much like, "Thank you so much for your invitation. I'm happy to." But I just replied with an animated GIF of James Earl Jones saying "Totes my goats,"
Yep.
and that just immediately let them know like it's going to be okay. Whatever we're going to do together, this work is going to be successful. I'm still going to be professional, but I also wanted them to know I'm a human being.
Yeah. Well, in this communication game, like you said, the level, I talked about this largely, again, on TikTok. Y'all can find me on TikTok, but how, as a Black woman going up the ranks in the corporate sector, and then getting to this point where they start to control your language, they want you to speak a very specific type of talk that
Mm,
is synonymous with, I'm a high level executive at a company. And I lost my identity making that climb to the point where I didn't feel relatable to a lot
mm,
of people, more specifically to people who look like me. And through this process of starting my own company, it's coming back to the realness of, again, we're just people. And not only that, I want to invite you along for this journey called life with me. And not to get all Prince on everybody, but really, we're in this game once and we're all trying to get to the end point. Can we help each other out? Can we build a community around it? And I think the fastest way to find your community is through the words that you speak. And that could be at work or otherwise. But at
mhm.
work, it's so much harder. And I think this is why people are lonely and they hate their jobs and they're not excited about it, is because we've lost the interpersonal connection of people. And that's just not from a physical return to office, which is a whole other argument. But it's, how do I make this less formal and just communicate with people like we're people?
That like we're all in this thing. How can we make it less horrible?
Right.
Like, and it's small things we can do, and you can drop the occasional animated GIF and be professional. And it's about context. It's all the unspoken things.
Hmm.
And to your point about showing up with a different identity or an identity that isn't like the default identity, you get into conversations around like respectability politics, and it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
when does code switching become just being a phony and getting a silk press and going to work in a suit and then going home and being a totally different person? So then it's like,
Uh-huh.
who are you even?
Right.
I have the privilege to try to be the same guy at all times,
Hmm.
but I am noticing that my Gen X Northwest kind of like chill vibe isn't always appropriate, and I'm having to like do a little bit of light code switching myself into like professional business person who looks like he knows what he's doing.
But isn't always appropriate for why? Right? Like, this is something so interesting because I have I know a number of executives who we had a music room at one of the companies I worked at. And they would go and they'd jam in the music room and they would let that quirky side out. And that was a part of their identity.
Hmm.
And that to me was the privilege, was you get to be that person as the older executive, and you get to show up and say, this is just me hanging with my friends and playing music. Whereas there is that leveling privilege where if you're in between that or you are an identity that is less present in the space, you have to be
Mm.
more buttoned up and in form.
Yeah, if you were, if it's a bunch of VPs and then a random PM too, and we're all playing Rock Band,
Uh-huh.
and you can maybe talk crap or like start playing the dozens and say something funny and insult the VP. In that context, for a moment, it might work, but you could cross a line very quickly, and then if you're not careful, your Rock Band familiarity may slip into a status report meeting, and
Exactly.
that's a challenge. That's a huge challenge.
Oh, heavens, the complexity, right?
Well, and this is what I'm trying to get my 17-year-old and my 19-year-old to understand is that humans are squishy and communication is challenging. And the way that you learn to speak this language is by speaking it, trying it, and shaking hands and looking people in the eye and all that kind of stuff. And it is very challenging.
To this point in my life, there has been very little, and I mean very little, like 99.9% of things that I have not been able to have a conversation out of. And what I mean by that is if we're teaching folks that communication is a method of being able to build stronger relationships, even when faults happen, apologies go a long way. Acknowledging people go a long way.
Mm.
Recognizing privileges in the room go a long way. But I do think that some people are adverse to having these real honest conversations about who's in the room with them, what's going on around them, what identity plays a part in the conversation. And I think we can all be better conversationalists, just getting to know one another, especially in corporate.
It's very, very true. Well, thanks for hanging out with me for this kind of
Yeah.
wide-reaching and rambly podcast. I learned a lot about how you think, and I know that you're bringing this expertise and this level of attention to detail to the work that you're doing at Counterpoint.
Yeah.
Folks can check it out at COUNTRPT, counter without the E,
Yep.
pt.io, and learn about what's going on there. They've got a newsletter, and you can download the app from the App Store and explore what Ash and her team are doing there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. This has been such a pleasure.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.